Hello and welcome to my easy to understand guide to the title sequence for The Returned or Les Revenants, which is one of the set texts for EDUCAS A-Level Media Studies in Component 2 in the Section A TV and Global Age topic. Now, it's an optional set text, not all schools study The Returned, so please don't panic if you are not one of them, but if you do, then hopefully this is going to be a nice, easy to understand short guide to how the title sequence appeals to an audience, how it signifies the genre and hints at a narrative, and why the programme makers have designed it the way that they did. So the title sequence begins with an establishing shot of the kind of dam, which plays quite a big role within the series itself. And you get this kind of very dark, low-key lighting with the girl walking down across that kind of dam area. And so you're immediately getting this hint that this is an important place within the story. And because of that low-key lighting, it's quite mysterious, which adds to that feeling that this is going to be quite a mysterious, enigmatic series. We see a lot of titles superimposed on the screen, so a lot of credits, program makers and production companies. It's the idea that these are the kind of TV companies behind this, and you will see there's actually quite a few TV companies and channels mentioned. And what that normally means is that they had to have a lot of different companies come together to make this. It's not necessarily something that was made by one giant company, but by a combination of production companies. And having their logos at the beginning would help to direct audiences towards what kind of program this is, if they're familiar with other programs made by those companies. And it might also suggest that getting funding for this programme was quite difficult. The fact that they had to have, several other companies, Canal Plus and Haute Court and, the other companies mentioned, it does suggest that perhaps this is not quite mainstream. A mainstream programme would tend to have one big company involved, but several companies might suggest this is a bit more niche and they had to get funding from several places in order to make it happen. Now, I won't lie, my French GCSE was an A star, but I didn't need an A star to realise that when it says en création originale, it means an original creation. Now, just those words, whether it's to a French audience that are familiar with the words or whether it's to a British or other global audience, most people would understand those words. We often quite like to know that a programme is original. It means it's not going to be something that, we've seen a million times before. It makes it feel more special. It's a bit like if you see like a Netflix original, sometimes people feel like that's going to be a more special programme. So the use of those words might hint to an audience that this is going to be something different that they've perhaps not seen before. The title for the show actually appears to come out of the water. And so the way they've designed this and the way they've done this font, it actually helps to foreshadow what's going to go on in the TV series. It implies that something is coming out of that lake, that something is appearing that was once hidden. And so the title itself is even designed to help to tell the audience perhaps what could happen within this series. They mention the director, Fabrice Gobert, and he is obviously a prominent director within France, and perhaps within France would engage audiences who are fans of his, even though he might not be as recognisable to more global audiences. Having the name of a reasonably well-known TV director may well help you to engage audiences in those first few minutes of a programme. It does mention that it was based on a film, and again, this is useful to engage audiences who may have seen the film and therefore may be more engaged by the TV programme. A lot of people do like that, they like to see the adaptation. And if people know it was based on a film, even though they haven't seen the film necessarily, sometimes it makes them think that this must be good quality, because if it's been adapted into a TV series, then it must have been popular. There are some quite dark images in this title sequence. We see lots of images of dead animals floating in the lake. So there's a deer and there's lots of other animals behind it floating. It's very clear that they're dead, and it's quite eerie because it's quite darkly lit and they're kind of floating in quite an unnatural way. And so there's very much this hint at the narrative about death and things dying. And things feeling unnatural, to see so many animals underwater dead like that, it clearly feels unnatural. And so there's very much this hint that this programme is going to be about life and death and an unnatural element of that. There's some quite surreal imagery in the title sequence as well. The camera sees a memorial that has been set up on top of the bridge, which we as an audience now, we know that that is perhaps for the people that went off the bridge in the bus. But certainly seeing a memorial on the side of the road again hints at this theme of death. This is echoed again when we see pictures of two people kissing, and then the camera tracks across to see two graves with crosses. It's quite complicated, I suppose, because the audience is left to guess, well, are they kissing right next to two graves, which again is quite strange, I suppose. Or there's two people and two graves. Are those two graves for those two people? And that's even creepier. So the use of these camera shots tracking from something that seems reasonably normal to something that seems a lot more dark and creepy, it adds to this feeling that something strange is going on. There's a room that appears to be full of taxidermied animals. So that is animals that have died that somebody's kind of stuffed and put on a wall or made into kind of ornaments, which again a lot of people feel is a sort of darker, creepier hobby, I suppose, and seeing all these kind of previously alive but now dead and stuffed animals adds to this kind of sinister undertone of the programme. And seeing a very much a live cat jumping up through this, it adds that juxtaposition, these binary opposites between the animals that are dead and the animals that are alive. So we're creating this idea of binary opposites between life and death. The scene outside the kind of power plant has like electricity going through the power lines, and you know, we often think of electricity being associated with sci-fi or you know, sort of sci-fi horrors like Frankenstein. This idea of Frankenstein's monster, you know, putting electricity into somebody to bring them to life, and so it creates this kind of sci-fi supernatural tone to the programme. There's an exterior shot of a girl who is bouncing a ball, and there's some puddles on the floor, and this could look quite nice, I suppose, maybe signifies there's going to be children in the programme. But if you do look carefully in the reflections that are on the floor in the puddles, there's actually two children playing in the reflections and only one child playing in the real world. And so it adds to this idea of something supernatural. There's something that is maybe there that we can't see, something hidden. It maybe plays with this idea of ghosts. So a lot of these images, even though they're very subtle, add to this kind of surreal supernatural feel. There is a person stood in a kind of arms outstretched pose, which I kind of like to think of as being like a Jesus pose, because he stood with his head back and his arms out. It's quite hard to tell who it is. It's the pose, I suppose, that's more important than anything else, because it has these kind of connotations of Jesus and maybe Christ on a cross. It adds to that theme of, you know, resurrection, people coming back from the dead. So it's the use of these kind of symbolic imagery that helps to audience to understand what could happen within this series. We see a scene of Simon standing in front of a town. It's all kind of in darkness and some houses are lit up. It's like a time lapse. So it's as though he stood there for hours, because you can see, you know, things moving around in the background. And that seems quite creepy, the idea that somebody is stood in one position for hours just staring at a town. It's quite surreal, it's quite odd, and it hints that these people perhaps and Simon and the other characters are a bit strange and a bit different. And the fact that he turns to look at the camera, it adds to that creepy nature. We often think that people shouldn't break that fourth wall. They shouldn't look directly at the camera in TV dramas. It's quite a strange thing to do. But he almost doesn't quite get there. As he turns, just before he makes eye contact with us, the camera cuts to something else. And so it's almost like leaving us on the edge of our seat. Right as we expected him to look straight at us, it cuts. So it adds this idea of things being a bit scary and a bit strange. And it's very much about leaving the audience quite tense. We're then inside a subway, like underneath maybe a tunnel, something like that. They're often quite darkly lit, and actually this is no different. You can see that the lights start turning off along the tunnel, which is quite scary. We often associate dark spaces with being quite scary because we can't see what's going on. And because the lights seem to be turning off from the background and coming towards the foreground, it makes it feel like that darkness is coming for us as an audience. And as the darkness comes towards us as an audience, this man pops up in front of the screen, and it's that kind of jump scare. So that's the moment when the audience gets the idea that this is actually could be quite a scary series. The kind of fogged up condensation mirror, potentially could be quite a normal scene, but because we see multiple reflections and handprints being kind of smeared across, this idea that somebody is there that we can't see properly, that all adds to this supernatural feel. So that was my easy to understand and quite simple and short guide to the title sequence for Les Revenants, or The Returned, for Media Studies A-level students. Please feel free to drop me a comment below if there's anything you want to ask or you want me to do a video about anything else. And don't forget to hit subscribe. Lots of other videos being uploaded throughout this year that will be useful for both GCSE and A-level students.